welcome back to the channel. And today I'm continuing my review of the Friday the 13th series with the 8th installment, Jason Takes Manhattan. Now this would be the last Friday the 13th movie released under Paramount, as by this time there was diminishing returns in profit because this was the lowest grossing movie at the time of its release, and on top of dealing with the negative controversy that came along with making slashers at the time, particularly Friday the 13th, which was the MPAA's punching bag, and the mainstream media was also attacking the franchise.
It uses the same basic old formula, the formula I call the dead teenager formula. You know, where there are a lot of living teenagers at the beginning of the movie, and by the end of the movie, all of the teenagers are dead.
Now this is often held as one of the worst movies of the franchise, but I'll be honest with you, when I was younger, I actually liked this movie quite a bit, but as time went on, the flaws did start to stand out more. So the question is, how far has this movie dropped for me? Let's jump right into it and get into the positives.
And here we go.
Jumping into my very first positive, despite the fact that most people criticize this movie for not taking place in New York for the majority of the runtime, I actually don't mind it. I like the setting of the cruise ship, the boat, because it gives you this isolated feeling and this feeling of dread because you really don't have anywhere to go. And on top of that, the few scenes that we do get at the end of the movie where Jason is in Manhattan, I really don't like it because it's not Jason-like. He's focused on just two individuals despite being in the city with thousands of people, despite the fact that he's going into a bar crowded with people, he's going downtown, going through the subways. He totally ignores everyone just to get at these two people. And if you made a whole movie just in that environment, I don't know how good the movie would be, but I actually like the fact that the majority of the runtime is in a boat. It's a decent little set. It's like being on a haunted house joyride, and I think it's pretty good. Another positive is, again, the soundtrack is fantastic, knocks it out the park. Especially the opening song, Darkest Side of the Night by Metropolis. It kind of gets you in the mood, gets you ready for this crazy adventure, even though it don't quite live up to its expectations. But ever since the Friday the 13th franchise started including licensed artists to go along with Harry Manfredini, despite the fact how bad the movie may be, the soundtrack is always on point. So the music is definitely a positive. And moving right along to another positive, despite the fact that most of the kills in this movie are bad, quick cutaway kills, there are two kills that stands out that I think is pretty good and badass. Obviously, I'm talking about Julius, the boxer scene, which is probably what this movie is most known for, where he's on top of the roof of a building and he has nowhere to go, so he tries to box Jason and get out of his predicament, run out, tell Jason take his best shot, and Jason knock his block off.
Take your best shot. Motherfucker.
But another kill that I really like and I think is underrated is Ava, where it's simple but effective. Where Jason picks her up, choke her, and the way he just slammed her down to the ground with a lifeless body, I think is a nice little touch, and I enjoy that kill. But unfortunately, that's all the positives I have for this movie. So let's just get right into it with the negatives. And the first negative, probably the biggest one for me, is the logic of this movie. From the fact that Jason is in a lake and then somehow he end up in the ocean to get on this cruise ship to go to New York, to the fact that there's toxic sewage that floods the sewers of New York, and the kid Jason, the kid hallucinations that the main character see, none of that makes any sense. I'm going to skip over the fact that there's no lake in New Jersey that connects to the ocean so you can get to New York. That's been talked about plenty of times. And I'm going to get right into the fact that they have this silly storyline of every night at midnight, the sewers of New York City is flooded by sewage just so they can have a corny ending.
What?
It makes absolutely no sense. It's completely ridiculous. And I hate that aspect of the end. And then the visions that the main character see with Kid Jason, even though it could have been a decent idea, the fact that every time you see Jason, he looks different. And I don't know if they're trying to say that over time maybe he was a normal kid, and then he's, as time goes on and her visions get stronger, that he's turning more into Jason as we know him. But even with that, it still makes no sense, because it's well established in the first movie that Jason was a mongoloid. He looks nothing like this kid, and the hallucinations come out of nowhere, and there's really no connection between the two characters except what this script shot of force. So the logic is a complete negative of its own. Another negative is, despite the fact that we're now officially in the Kane Hodder era, I do not like the look of Jason in this one. At the very beginning, when he comes out the lake, it makes sense for him to be wet. But we're in the movie hour and a half, where within this timeline, it's been a couple of days and he's still soaking wet. He make this squishy sound every time he walk. He look like somebody just covered him in slime. And it really takes away from the fact of Kane Hodder being Jason. And on top of that, speaking of being in the Kane Hodder era, regardless of the fact if you like him or not, you cannot dispute the fact that the majority of these movies from here on out are pretty bad, or not well received from the fan base.
And that's no good.
And this is a misfire for me, from the look to the performance, even the look of Jason at the end, which leading into my very last negative, the ending. The way they killed Jason and he revert back to a child makes absolutely no sense. And that mask that Kane Hodder has to wear, where his face is melting, look like a Jim Henson puppet being left out in the sunlight too long. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. And it's not even explained in the next movie, Jason Go to Hell, how he got back to Crystal Lake. And matter of fact, as much as people hate that movie, that New Line Cinemas realized that this movie was so bad, this is the only movie within the timeline that's not canon. So they just disregard this movie and act like this movie does not exist. So with all that said, if you haven't figured out by now, I'm not a fan of this movie in particular. I think this is one of the worst entries within the franchise. And to be honest with you, if you haven't seen this movie, I don't think you're missing anything by not seeing it. So I'm going to have to rate this movie a skip. So what do you guys think? Is this one of your favorite movies of the franchise, or this one near the bottom? Or you're somewhere like me with this middle of the road, or something you could do without? Let me know in the comment section down below. Remember, these are just my opinions. Let me know yours, and keep your eyes open for my next video.